Do you believe there is ever a legitimate reason to leave the church?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Cardin Ellis. The show is Midnight Mormons, and we've got our co-hosts here, none other than Brad Whitbeck and Kwaku L. And we're actually just going to dive right in. One of the things I love about this show, Brad, is that we really have an opportunity to meet all kinds of people with all kinds of diverse opinions. And when the conversation is civil, it actually leads to some really good chicken soup for the soul, some golden nuggets of thought, so on and so forth. And anyway, one of these came from 123 Neil. M. Neil, was it? Yeah. Okay, I couldn't remember her YouTube moniker, but I didn't want to give out her real name because I got permission to use the sound file, but I don't know if I got permission to use the name. So right now, it's from Avatar 123 M. Neil, and she sent us this really interesting question. I'd like to put it to you. Here we go.
Okay. Don't mind my kid in the background. All right. Maybe this is going to be easier. I don't know if we're going to be able to line up schedules or anything. So I was curious. Do you believe there is ever a legitimate reason to leave the church?
Okay. So she asked a very direct question. Mm-hmm. Do you believe there is ever a legitimate reason to leave the church? Very straightforward question. I can dig that. I have my thoughts and my opinions. Looks like you guys have yours. Who wants to go first? Brad, you don't talk enough. Brad, you go.
No. 100%, unequivocally. No one can ever leave. No one can leave and be honest intellectually. You have to be deceived by the devil. Okay, so now that I'm done channeling Kwaku for a second, I think that 100%, like, the difficulty with this question lies in the word legitimate, right? I think there are people who have experiences that warrant them leaving the church that I think God is going to be way more merciful for than we think. This ties back into my thoughts on, like, people who leave the church kind of viewing themselves as apostates. I think that gets overblown, right?
Okay.
So the simple answer, like the yes or no, I think, yeah, there are. So that's mine, but I think that there's a ton of nuance in that answer that I'd love to discuss going forward from there.
Okay, Kwaku.
Yes. However, it's got to be either you were just converted to a different religion, or something terrible happened to you, or when you say left, you just mean you went inactive. If you just decided, like, I'm going to remove my records from the church and, badmouth it for the rest of your life, I don't think it's a very legitimate identity.
Huh. Interesting. Wow. You just delegitimize somebody's identity.
Yes.
That's like liberalism no 101.
I don't believe you exist.
Oh my gosh.
This is
post-Mormon erasure.
Yeah. And I'll do it again tomorrow.
Jeez, crazy, man. I actually thought a lot about this. And this was actually one of those very emotional wrestles with God that I had. I've thought a lot about this over the past 2 or 3 days. And actually, I've thought a lot about it. I had my answer in 30 seconds, so it's not like something I wrestle with in that regard. But I don't know, maybe on this one, I'm the one riding the sensitivity train, because I felt 2 emotions instinctually at once. Mm-hmm. Okay. And my answer is, the short answer is yes, sometimes there is. And those times are tied to a mortal experience that I view as being sometimes impossible. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then it was immediately tempered with the desire to clarify what that is and what that isn't. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I lived in Children's Hospital of Los Angeles for an entire year as we fought to save my daughter's life. Mm-hmm. Okay. I lived in the cancer wing of a children's hospital. And you learn a lot of very deep and profound lessons very quickly there. I have comforted parents who were literally watching their children die. I've had to babysit kids and older brothers who have said to me, can I come play with you? You seem cool, because the doctors just came in an emergency visit to my sister, and it's better if I'm not in the room taking up space. I've held my own daughter when she has stopped breathing, and there's a finality that happens to you when you go to that abyss and that darkness and you look over, and that finality teaches you something in that moment that is unteachable and unrelatable to on earth unless you've gone through it. And there's lots of parents, actually I shouldn't say lots. I was actually amazed with how many people did not lose their faith because of their experience in the children's hospital, but there's some that are. It's too much for them. Sometimes the suffering of their children leads couples that otherwise would have had happy marriages to divorce. And you know, as much as you think, hey, we got through it, so could you, or this or that, you know, you're not them, you're not in their shoes. You don't know what coping mechanisms God gave them or God didn't. You know what I'm saying? And that is such a terrible and crappy thing to go through, that yes, as much as I think that our trials should strengthen us, not weaken us, I don't believe we interpret that scripture correctly, that God will only give us that which we can bear. I think oftentimes our conversations on that topic are incorrect, because I don't think the starving children in Rwanda were just called to bear that. You know what I'm saying? I'm not Calvinist in this deterministic thing. I think sometimes people are giving trials that they cannot bear. That's why it's an Abrahamic test. That's why Job is such an amazing story and one of the oldest stories from the Bible. Okay. And so my answer, without veering too verbose, is there are times where I don't like how she used words legitimate. Like, do you think there's legitimate reasons to leave the church, right? First off, I don't have to legitimize you. You're a human being. You have your own agency. You do you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not here to stand in judgment of you. Okay. However, there are things that I can understand and I can see, and there's things that I don't. And so I can see, I've talked to a very select few people that have had some faith crises, not just like, oh, I read like 3 pages of the CES letter and felt justified and everything I always thought I hated, and so now I'm leaving. You know what I'm saying? Like, like not that. If you've been through something truly terrible that makes you question the existence of God, because who wouldn't it make question? I am very empathetic to that. What I'm not empathetic to is this new breed of spoiled, privileged victims that fancy themselves some kind of victim Olympians because they slept through seminary their entire lives. They never finished reading the books they were supposed to read on their mission. They never really completed much of any part of their religious education. And then upon stumbling upon a blog post by somebody who misquotes history on purpose, i.e. John DeLynn, Radio Free Mormon, name them all, okay? When you stumble upon those factoids and then say, oh, I was lied to. And now my whole life, your whole what? Your whole righteous and benevolent upbringing where people sacrificed for you, made sure you got your Eagle Scout and kept you out of drugs and alcohol. You know what I'm saying? This breed of ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon podcaster who fancies itself a victim of anything other than a wholesome upbringing, saying that they're having a faith crisis. No, what you're having is you're adulting. You're adulting. You're realizing that maybe there's nuance to some of these things. And just like I learned that the US government wasn't always honest with me. And even though in the movies, the army always looks great, just watching a Michael Bay movie, the army can do no wrong. You know what I'm saying? Until you read about, you know, the Wounded Knee Massacre. And you realize we basically slaughtered a bunch of Indians because one of them had a mental illness, stepped out of line, and the racist lieutenants that wanted to get rid of him anyway used it as an excuse to just basically start massacring people. And those that received the Purple Heart for bravery and being wounded in the action of battle were probably shot by friendly fire, because that's how stupid we were. Okay. So just like I can learn that about US history doesn't mean I'm going to march down to the embassy, renounce my US citizenship, and then all of a sudden from within the borders of the US, ask them for their protections and their First Amendment rights as I start blogging about how horrible they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that level of irony and cynicism that really bothers me. So I guess I'm talking way too much here. I apologize. But I don't like the term, is there a legitimate reason? There's reasons that I could understand.
Mm-hmm.
There's reasons that I could understand and these reasons are reasons that when in theory should be overcomeable through faith.
Yeah.
But in practice, I can see how it's just too hard.
Yeah, because that's what it comes down to for me is I don't know the experiences of the people who are going through what they're going through, right? I don't know what has happened for them. So I think that when people are going through something really, really difficult and they end up choosing to leave the church over what they're experiencing, that's not on me to decide whether or not that was right or wrong. I think that's between them and God, right? And I've had friends who are dealing with really, really difficult things, try to figure out how to reconcile being in the church or not, right? And I think sometimes we get really narrow and focused on this, where somebody leaving the church right now doesn't mean that they'll never come back. Right? It doesn't mean they won't figure things out down the line. Like, we forget the parable of the prodigal son. Like, people can leave and come back.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they have to, or that everything's over if they never come back, right? Like, but I think that we need to remember to still love our neighbor, even if they're making choices that we might disagree with.
Yeah. And also, I hate to say this, but even some of those choices at those times, in those specific instances, I can't say I really disagree with it too much. I felt lucky with my experience in the children's hospital. I felt lucky. As horrible and heinous as it was, you learn really, really quickly that hospitals are like that movie, The Platform.
Mm-hmm.
There's always 100 levels lower than you,
Mm-hmm.
full of people that wouldn't sacrifice a limb to change places with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it always gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I won't name the family member because I don't want people to go harass them online and send them the same horrible messages that they send to us. But I have unnamed friend / family member that, you know, wife was an amazing woman. She gets super rare form of cancer that can only be explained by the most infinitesimal of chances. And they fight it with everything from experimental drugs to this and that. And probably the sweetest woman that God created was put through the most painful and torturous regimen of experimental cancer-saving drugs that ultimately she ended up succumbing to anyway. And so I can see how a man who has just been kind and done to the best of his abilities his entire life can look at me and say, you know, how can you believe in a benevolent Father in heaven that loves his daughter and then allows this level of pain and suffering to happen? I mean, I get that. And in reality, yes, all of us are thinking the theoretical answers to that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But when you've been through it, that's something where I would actually ask that question to my seminary students when I was a volunteer seminary instructor. I said, you want the easy questions or the hard questions for the end of their doctrinal exam. And what was so interesting was seeing some of their responses. And another kid had a family member that had gone through the exact same thing, and it was brutal. And it had affected the testimony of some of the members of his nuclear family. But he also said, I got to know her better and on a deeper spiritual level than I ever did. And this was his grandma. And he said, if it wasn't going to harm her testimony, why would I let it harm mine? So out of these deep and horrific experiences, especially in terms of human health, I see people that just, they somehow it kicks them in the butt heavenward. And then other people, I see it kick them in the butt downward. And you want to know what? I laud these people and I think they're amazing, but I have zero judgment for those over here. Mm-hmm. Okay. But just like the gosh, I was going to make an example here, but it's political and I try and not do that. But that, I feel, is 1%
Yeah.
of the cases of what we're dealing with here in the Blogger Knuckle. Okay, I don't feel that this is the Bill Reels, the John DeLynns, the Zelf on the Shelves. These people, I do not feel have gone through that level, okay, to those depths. And there's all kinds of other questions in play. The coolness, a part of the Rosebud testimony revealed that, John DeLynn wanted his September 6th excommunication. And then you can't look at these people that are podcasting and angry against us and not feel like you're looking at somebody who had found some kind of identity in their midlife crisis. You know what I'm saying? And it is now just attacking because their small petty tyrant fiefdom is under attack. That kind of crap I have almost zero tolerance for, because having been in that situation where I have comforted people who have literally been watching their children die, I just think, you punk with no problems. You know what I'm saying? Like, you absolute spoiled baby. We have a German elder here, Elder Slaughter, and believe it or not, I don't agree with him on everything. There's been plenty of times where, like, in meetings, I've like made comments and stuff like that, in direct opposition to what I think his judgment should be in a situation, right? But he did say something interesting the other day. He said, mostly a lot of these problems with elders saying like they can't go out to work because they feel, they feel down or blue or depressed or whatever. And this is not to mock mental health issues or anything like that. But he said this is largely an American elder problem. And I found that interesting. And he thought it was tied to wealth, because we have somehow become so wealthy, okay, that now our victims are no longer, the people with horrid diseases. It's like we're getting this strange victim Olympics that's going on. And it's almost as though there's like these people that we've made this cool, that they're like, I want to be cool too. So I want to somehow say I'm a victim and then make a podcast out of it, because that's what you do to be in the cool kids victim club. And I think that's heinous and is a horrible thing to do to the people that have gone through the lower platforms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay, sorry, I've spoken way too much, and I probably said a million things that are going to get clipped.
No,
and
dude,
people are going to say you're intolerant, but
it's a heavy topic. It's a heavy thing to try to figure out, because one of the core things about this question is coming from somebody that I think is, like, in some ways looking for validation, that they know, they just feel judged, I think, by members of the church.
Or maybe they're not confident in their answer.
Yeah, and that could be part of it too, right? And so I think that the core thing when it comes down to when people are thinking about leaving the church is just keep it between you and God, Like, if you are figuring it out and talking to God about what you're going to be doing, then you're going to be all right, right? And if you don't believe there's a God, then, I mean, that makes it, I think, an easier decision. I knew a guy on my mission who he wasn't sure if there was a God anymore. And he still kept coming to church to find out if there was, right? Because he thought that would be his best bet to figuring out whether there really was a God or not. And I think one thing that we can take away from this is, like, when you're being decisive about things, I think that's better than not. Like, don't just continue living a certain way because it's easy, but, like, figure out what you actually believe and then live according to it.
Yeah. And the other thing that came to my mind is I really think that this is almost completely case by case.
Yeah.
Like this, we've become so used to, especially in North America, to some kind of standardized, bureaucratic, gubernatorial kind of way of addressing almost all of life's problems, whether it's from poverty or even religion itself, because we have standardized manuals to teach. We're so used to standardized everything. I think what's really going to surprise us when we go to heaven is how completely unstandardized judgment is. Mm-hmm. We view it as the courts of heaven, and we view it as the analogies that we can grasp for in our society that probably give us a legalistic approach to the gospel. Okay.
Yes. So there are reasons to leave if you want.
So to bring it back around to the original question, though, it was, are there any legitimate reasons to leave the church, right? And I think that's a really, like, legitimate can be a different word to a lot of people. And so, like, I wonder if they're trying to ask, like, are there any good reasons to leave the church, or any, like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in my mind, I was just going to say, I agree with you that the hinge point for me is legitimate. I don't like the idea as if, like, I'm legitimizing you or something. I don't know. For some reason that rubbed me wrong. But also, I wouldn't say legitimate is the word I would have chosen. I'm saying understandable is the word I would have chosen.
Yeah.
I would say there are moments that I've heard from friends where, had I walked a mile in their moccasins, I don't agree with their decision, but I understand it and I love them notwithstanding. And I love the phrase that people say, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And so there's been people that have made decisions to be in and out of the church to varying degrees, where my love for them is trumps any kind of foolish human judgment that might have about the decisions that they've made.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops.
And so a thing that I think is actually important to keep in mind with this too is there are people who leave the church, I think, and then end up reading quotes about, like, apostates. And they read something from, like, Brigham Young era talking about apostates and equate it with themselves, when really Brigham Young era apostate people are, like, people who are leaving the church and then joining the mobs that are pushing Mormons out of their houses.
Yeah.
Right? There's a huge difference between a Brigham Young era apostate
and actively combating those that choose to stay. See, that's where for me, this lynch point is. Like, it's one thing to say this isn't for me for X, Y, or Z reason. Fine. All of us are fine with that.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But it's when all of a sudden you become an active combatant. And by the way, actually, I shouldn't say that you shouldn't be an active combatant of something you believe in. Because, let's just say you really did believe that, like, okay, cool, we have to end this thing because religion is just a hypnosis of the mind and all that other stuff. You know what I'm saying? Fine. Yeah. But don't descend to the levels of intellectual dishonesty where you're lying about the history and lying about the interpretation and lying about the motive of those that choose to stay in.
Yeah.
As some kind of justification for why you left and are now superior to those that stayed.
Yeah.
And that's probably where my emotional reaction comes to that question.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. I think sometimes I've had friends who have left the church be like, oh, the church teaches that I will be in outer darkness now. And I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Nope.
That is
Never
not
said
what
that.
It teaches. That's not what it is. So I think that people get really final in where they're at right now, when really, like, there's still time to figure things out. And, like, just because you stopped going to church doesn't mean you're going to hell, Yeah. Like,
so how would you answer that question then? Because it kind of was, do you think? That kind of does come across as a yes and no or no question.
Oh yeah, I'm totally thinking that they're looking for a yes or no question. Part of it, I think, is because there are people who accuse the church of saying that there are no reasons that people could ever leave the church, that there's no good reasons ever that anybody could leave the church, and that
again, that's a question of, well, what's good mean?
Yeah.
And I won't say good reason, I'd say understandable.
I agree.
Which is different.
I agree. But I think it comes from people thinking or feeling like the church is trying to manipulate people into staying in the church.
Which is totally untrue. Moroni's promise is the bedrock of our faith and our conversion process, both from people born in the church to those that come into it in adult years.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with coercion.
And I think, like, of course the church wants people to stay in it. We believe this is true. We believe this will bring you closer to God. Of
and that
course,
it's good for you.
Yeah. Of course we want you to stay, but that doesn't mean we're going to coerce you into it by saying that there are no legitimate ways to leave.
Yeah. And by the way, anybody that says that you're getting coerced or whatever is, once again, to me, that's just saying that it's a doctrine of coercion is, to me, just so abjectly dishonest, because like one of the very first things that was an kind of official thing that Joseph Smith did besides the Book of Mormon, all right, was the famous, not the Wentworth letter, but what was a letter that became the Articles of Faith? Remember the interaction that he had with the journalist from the East Coast that ended up becoming the Articles of Faith. It literally says, we believe in letting men worship how, where, and what they may. That is a definition of pure tolerance for anybody else's ideas, how, where, or what they may. So,
and here's another thing that may be important to address. Sometimes there are people who maybe do try to manipulate their family members into staying, right?
Oh yeah, but into leaving. We've seen those horrible TikToks of people saying, "Oh, you can't love me without this," like to their horrible boomer grandparents. They're like, "No, I still love you. Don't hate me." You know, like,
and see, the thing that I think is important for us to point out is like people who are doing that, people who are manipulating people into staying in the gospel are doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
That isn't what we should do.
Small townism. Kwaku calls it suburbanism.
Exactly.
It's the worst aspect of human societies when they get together and they have enough wealth to live without too many problems, but not enough wealth to like actually make major macro changes in the world.
And it is not what the church teaches you to do.
Yeah.
The church teaches you to love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to reach out to them. I think it's interesting because there are people who I've seen be very like up in arms that they've ever had a home teacher come over, right? And feel like the church is stalking them because their records got moved and things like that. And it's like, guys, these people just care about you. And I've heard stories of people being manipulative. I don't know if they're
or
real.
maybe also we're
maybe they are
a basketball team. We heard you're pretty decent at basketball. So yeah, I mean, there's like, I would all the time call in active guys. You know what I've said? Dude, if playoffs are coming up, dude, like, okay, we've got 11 dudes. We could sure as heck use 12. I heard you got a mean crossover. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, you want to come play with us, dude? And, I was calling friends that weren't members, calling inactive people, literally just start a basketball team in a rec league. I mean, sorry, in the church league, which then ended up becoming part of the rec league. So yeah, when I have difficulty when people try and ascribe the worst motives on people who are wholly decent in every way. So, okay, I think we've pretty much answered this question.
I think so too.
1, 2, 3, I thought it was McNeil.
Emneal, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Hopefully we answered it. Of course, we probably completely misinterpreted her question.
Yeah.
She's probably screaming at the screen right now, thinking, no, you didn't get to the heart of the matter, or whatever.
Yeah.
If so, we welcome you to drop us another little voicemail. Hopefully we'll connect. Hey, and you want to know what? You seem so cool and cordial. We welcome you on the show to talk about this. With that said, wrap this up.
I think that, there are reasons people leave the church, and those reasons are their own. It's up to them to decide between them and God what it is they're going to do with their lives. And
Brad Whitbeck, Apostle 2028. This is Midnight Morning.
That is not how that works. No one runs for apostle. You would be excommunicated.
Oh, not when I become prophet. This is Midnight
Oh
Morning.
my gosh.